There are many things to consider when we talk about effective stress management. One of the things which I'd like to address today is the idea of healthy boundaries. When you think about your own boundaries, everybody has some kind of boundaries. Some of your boundaries may be more well defined than others, some of them may be more consistent than others. And some people may have better well-defined boundaries than others, but at some level, everybody has some kind of boundaries, or at least that's the hope. Are there people out there who have very few boundaries? Yes, of course. And for those of you, I strongly recommend that you pay close attention to this episode. So think about your boundaries in terms of your interactions with other people. Boundaries can refer to relationships in general. Boundaries can also refer to your interactions in your personal time or in your workspace, in your work time, or during your work hours. What are your boundaries like? Are you able to say no? Are you able to define parameters within which others have to exist? So, for example, are you a person who can say, I'm not going to take any interruptions until such and such time, and mean it? Or, I can't take on any more tasks or projects until I complete X, Y, and Z, and then mean it? Or are you a person who says yes to everyone and everything, regardless of whether or not you want to say yes, or whether or not you have the time or the resources to give to others what they're asking for? Boundaries can be vague sometimes, especially when overshadowed by relationships or the nature of your relationship. Boundaries can be tricky if you are inconsistent with them. It's bad enough when there are no boundaries, when your boundaries are lacking. But at least, if that's the case, you have a clean slate where you can start by introducing boundaries into your experience. If you've never said no to a request from a friend or a coworker or a neighbor, now you can start by saying no. You don't have to be mean about it. You don't have to be unpleasant or unprofessional. You simply say no. Sometimes that no may be followed by something else, such as, I simply don't have the time right now, or I simply don't have the resources right now, or I'm simply not interested right now. Other times, a simple no may suffice. Practicing setting boundaries will allow you to get comfortable with it and then discern on a case-by-case basis how much of an answer you want to or need to give to someone else. When you are someone who is inconsistent with boundaries, setting boundaries may be a little more tricky only because other people expect the inconsistencies and see them as a weakness in that if they press you long enough, hard enough, if they badger you, if they nag you, if they plead or beg long enough, you will eventually give in and say yes to their request because your boundaries have been inconsistent. And every time we are inconsistent with boundaries, we teach others to keep trying because eventually we probably will relent and say yes to whatever their request is. So remember, whether you are lacking in boundaries or are inconsistent with boundaries, you have to make a conscious decision and you have to put in the effort to establish boundaries, but then you have to hold on to those boundaries. You cannot allow inconsistency to weaken your position. Setting boundaries is something that requires practice. If you're not good at setting or keeping boundaries, or you don't have many boundaries or any at all, it's going to be a new experience and a learning opportunity for you. So just because it's tough today doesn't mean it will be tough a week or a month from now. So continue to practice and continue to reassess and redefine your boundaries. Boundaries don't have to be written in stone. They can change as you get better at setting boundaries, but they can also change as situations change, as your preferences change, as your availability of time and resources change. So keep that in mind. Boundaries do not have to be set in stone as long as they are the right boundaries for the time and the place as far as you're concerned. So be prepared that today's boundaries may or may not work 6 months from now or 10 years from now. They may, but they may not. They may need a revision, and that's okay. That's not inconsistency. Inconsistency is flip-flopping back and forth without being clear and committed to one thing. But change over time, because it makes sense, is perfectly fine. So practice setting boundaries, or practice reestablishing your boundaries. Practice keeping your boundaries without being inconsistent or without true commitment to them. And you will get better with time. The other thing that you will see change is other people's response. The better you are at defining and keeping your boundaries, the better people will get at respecting your boundaries. It's hard to respect non-existent boundaries because they're not there. Equally difficult is respecting inconsistent boundaries. There's simply no clear message with inconsistency. And are people going to potentially present some pushback to your new efforts of establishing boundaries or being more consistent with boundaries? Yes, of course. But what does that mean for you? That just means that you need to continue to practice, reevaluate if necessary, but stick to your guns, so to speak. And people who have respect for you and who deserve to be in your life will eventually learn what your boundaries are and will respect them. If someone continues to yell and scream and beat you up over your boundaries, maybe it's time to reconsider their role in your life altogether. So remember, having boundaries, having healthy boundaries, is key when it comes to managing stress properly. Having no boundaries or inconsistent boundaries invites more stress into your life. But consistent, healthy boundaries can be a tremendous help in managing stress. This is yet another tool for your proverbial toolbox. Establishing and maintaining healthy boundaries is critical in maintaining long-term mental health and well-being. And remember, boundaries should not be set in stone. Most boundaries, I should say, should not be set in stone, in that when time and situation calls for it, or with the passage of time, you may decide to shift or change your boundaries. And that's okay, as long as you're doing it for you and for all the right reasons, not because somebody has nagged you for long enough. Similarly, being so committed to a boundary that no longer makes sense can become counterproductive. So be willing to know that boundaries may require change and adjustment over time. The bottom line is that healthy boundaries can help you to manage stress more effectively. So look at the boundaries that you currently have, or maybe don't have. Look at how consistent or inconsistent you are with them, and roll up your sleeves to get going with some work on setting healthy boundaries to help you better manage the stress in your life. If you'd like to learn more about a comprehensive approach to stress management, check out the link below.